15th. Mary, could you read the
Approval of the agenda?
approval of the agenda, please?
Yep, that the agenda of Monday, November 13th, 2017 Board of Education meeting be approved as set forth, and that each item is considered ready for discussion and/or action.
Is there a second?
Second.
You need a roll call?
Director Borcherding? Aye. Director Anhalt?
Aye.
Director Meisterling?
Aye.
Vice President Humbles?
Aye.
Is Kristen Jansen on the phone? Director Jansen? Aye. Director Jansen is joining us by phone this evening.
Okay, next we have the superintendent's report. Dr. Buck?
All right, thank you, and good evening. So last week, Kenwood Leadership Academy held a Veterans Day sing-along celebration. Leading up to the event, students learned about U.S.-born veterans and those who've immigrated from another country and chose to serve in the U.S. military. Through their learning, students explored the essential question, how does music bring our country together? The event honored veterans who, along with students' families, were invited to attend the sing-along. A delegation of 18 Chinese educators from Beijing National Day International School in Qingdao recently visited several schools in our district. They observed classrooms, shadowed students, and met with teachers and administrators about American classrooms and school practices. The delegation was especially interested in better understanding our district's approaches to project-based learning and how they might adopt project-based learning in their own school. McKinley Middle School has been awarded an energy education grant to be used for a project on energy justice. Students in the GO program will perform energy audits on a variety of homes to understand social factors that can influence energy efficiency of a home and learn how individual residents can reduce energy loss. Students will analyze their data and present their findings and recommendations to select community organizations and government agencies. Sixth grade students are currently learning through Career Speaker Day, an annual opportunity made available through the Workplace Learning Connection. Students learn about a wide variety of careers during interactive presentations by representatives from various businesses and organizations, including Lynn County Farm Bureau, the Cedar Rapids Police and Fire Departments, and Theater Cedar Rapids. Thank you to WLC and their business partners who share their time and knowledge with these students. Together, we're connecting today's students to tomorrow's careers. Some of you may have seen this. Over the weekend, Washington High School staged an electrifying production of Disney's Newsies. Washington is one of a few schools approached to pilot a student production of Newsies before its release into general licensing. A few conversations between two Jefferson High School grads, one who's a counselor at Wash and the other who's working at Disney, eventually led to Washington being approached for this unique opportunity. Washington documented the process from auditions and rehearsals to performances, and their resources will be used by Disney to create a production handbook that will be distributed to other schools that license the show. And then I'm going to say finally, but I actually have one more beyond the finally here. Finally, we have a very excited announcement regarding our school district's instrumentalists. 60 of our finest instrumentalists will perform in the Northeast Iowa Bandmaster Association honor bands on Saturday, December 2nd at Olwine High School. These students were chosen from more than 900 applicants from 80 schools to represent Cedar Rapids at the district level. Schools represented include Franklin, Harding, McKinley, Roosevelt, Taft, Wilson, Jefferson, Kennedy, and Washington. So congratulations to these students and their band directors. And if I could add one more item, and I'm actually going to ask Steve to give me a little bit of a boost here with this one. So one of the things on the agenda tonight is related to the physical plant and equipment projects for the 2018-2019 school year. And so this is an annual event. We bring this in front of the board for the upcoming projects as part of the PEPL Promise. And so I've asked Steve to talk a little bit about where we are in that process because it may be a little bit unique compared to what it's been to the last few years. So, oh, he's going to the podium. All right.
Yes, Justin told me to go to the podium tonight. So,
Yeah.
at any rate, well, this is in most years, a very routine approval for the PEPL Promise. We have a 10-year PEPL Promise that we promised our voters back in 2014, and so we've mapped out every building and all the projects for that 10-year time period. Now we have our Year 4 PEPL Promise projects before you tonight for your consideration. I think that it's important for you to realize that some of these projects are included within our facility master plan realm, that we have done a lot of work and have looked at our buildings that will be with us potentially and buildings that may not be with us potentially in the future, and recognizing that the Board of Education has before it at least the scheduled vote on the 22nd of January to consider the plan. So clearly there's an intersection between the PEPL promise that you have before you tonight and the facility master plan coming before you in January. So we recognize that, and we recognize the sensitivity towards being good stewards of public dollars, but also, more importantly, we are very sensitive to the safety and welfare of our students and staff. And so we will be looking at these projects, and we will be evaluating them and moving forward expeditiously but cautiously as well between now and the 22nd of January. So this is something that you should know and hopefully know and our community is aware of, that we are very, very safety-minded with our staff and our students with this plan. So I'm not sure if I've hit all the talking points with this one, Dr. Buck, but I'm happy to answer questions if you have any.
And I would just kick in one more item. In approving this list tonight, it doesn't require that these projects be completed. So we have them in front of you so we can continue to talk about them and investigate them. But if it becomes clear that there's an intersection between, and we give a more specific example, $30,000 worth of paving at Coolidge, right? Isn't that one of them that's
Yes.
on there? So as we look at that, if the board approves a facilities plan and if Coolidge is a Tier 1 school, then do we look at holding off on doing $30,000 of that work, knowing that it may be an all-new parking lot a few years from now, and do we invest to keep it safe, as Steve has described, and without potholes that people will lose their car in, that kind of thing. So we're going to try to work on that balancing act. So tonight is really just approving that year 4, and then we'll continue to dig into details within that plan, so.
Do you mind if I comment? I work with someone who sits on the oversight committee, and they had a very good discussion about this topic specifically, and I think all of them endorsed these items on the agenda tonight, so. Community reviewed.
Yes, we had a great conversation with the Oversight Committee. They're very much on board with this, and they're looking forward actually to providing a board update here sometime in the month of maybe February or March to give the board an update on facilities from their perspective.
Thanks, Steve.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Bob. Are there any board reports?
Yes. I just want to thank the public that came out for our facilities presentations this last week. There was over 100 at each of those sessions. Good participation, good questions, good dialogue, very civil dialogue. A lot of concern, a lot of questions, some common themes, I think, through the 3 nights. But I appreciate that the citizens did come out, and the fact that they still, if someone wasn't able to make those meetings, they still have the opportunity through the website, to our website, to be able to provide input to the board. So.
Thank you.
Any other reports? If not, we have communications, delegations, and petitions, and we have one communication. Tanya Johnson, if you could come forward, please, and state your name and address. You are allotted 5 minutes.
Hi, I'm Tanya Johnson, 3816 Riverside Drive, and I'm speaking to you as the Cedar Rapids Education Association president. I have 2 items. One is I want to let you know that we had 6 teachers that applied to recertify for their national board certification, and we had 6 teachers that recertified and found out in October. That was Kristen Wolf at Van Buren, Sarah Phillips at Harrison, Lynette Hauser at Kenwood Leadership Academy, Karla Riley at the ELSC, Elizabeth Olsom at Harding, and Susan Van Wart at the ELSC. So I wanted to publicly recognize them for their accomplishments on this and their hard work at being nationally board certified. The other thing I'd like to talk about is, some of you may or may not know that this is American Education Week. And being American Education Week, the National Education Association works at reminding us how important public schools are. And I found it really interesting to see the history of this and where it came from. The National Education Association was one of the creators and original sponsors of American Education Week. They were distressed that 25% of the country's World War I draftees were illiterate and 9% were physically unfit. Representatives of the NEA and the American Legion met in 1919 to seek ways to generate public support for education. Sounds like what we're doing today. What goes around comes around. The conventions of both organizations subsequently adopted resolutions of support for a national effort to raise public awareness of the importance of education. In 1921, the NEA Representative Assembly met in Des Moines, Iowa, called for a designation of 1 week each year to spotlight education. In its resolution, the NEA called for an educational week observed in all communities annually for the purpose of informing the public of the accomplishments and needs of the public schools and to secure the cooperation and support of the public in meeting those needs. The first observance of American Education Week occurred in 1921 with the NEA and the American Legion as co-sponsors. A year later, then, the U.S. Office of Education joined the effort as a co-sponsor, and the PTA followed in 1938. Other co-sponsors of the U.S. Department of Education and national organizations include the PTA, the American Legion Auxiliary, the American Association of School Administrators, National School Board Association, American Federation of Teachers, American School Counselors, Council of Chief State School Officers, National School Public Relations Associations, and National Association of State Boards of Education, National Associations of Elementary School Principals, and National Associations of Secondary School Principals. The American Education Week is always celebrated the week prior to the week of Thanksgiving. This week, in Cedar Rapids, we are not having any formal exciting activities to go along with this, but I did think as we get closer to Thanksgiving and we're thinking about what we're thankful for, one of the things we are definitely thankful for is our great public schools. And through this week throughout the country, tomorrow they will be celebrating parents because we couldn't have great public schools without parents. On Wednesday, it is Education Support Professionals Day. On Thursday, it is Educator for a Day, which we have done in the past and hope to do again maybe in January this year. And on Friday, we are celebrating substitutes, which we know in Cedar Rapids is something we really want to celebrate as well. So just wanted to bring that to attention of everyone, and thank you very much.
And thank you. Next, we'll move on to the consent agenda. Are there any items that anyone would like to pull or have any concerns about? We will need a motion due to the personnel report.
So moved.
Can we get a second?
Second.
This requires a roll call.
Director Jacobo?
Aye.
Director Borcherding? Director Anhalt? Director Meisterling?
Aye.
Vice President Humbles?
Aye. Next, we move to learning and leadership information items. Every Student Succeeds Act, an update from Dr. Buck.
Just a second. What are you signaling here, Justin?
Kristen.
Oh.
Oh, excuse me. Director Jansen.
That's okay, Laurel.
I'm very
Aye.
sorry. Did you say aye?
I did.
Thank you.
You know, Kristen, next time we need to do a flat Stanley of you, and you could be here with us, and then we would see you in the room. Yeah, so,
I'll go ahead and do that.
no, that's good. So may I do an introduction of Amy, or are we on
Yes.
that one? Okay, very good. So you guys are in for a treat tonight. Amy Williamson is with us, Bureau Chief of School Improvement. Am I doing that okay? Yeah? So I had the privilege of working with Amy in my previous role. Amy's bright, articulate, and she knows more about ESSA than probably most. So I am super excited you're here. Give us an overview of ESSA and its implications for Iowa specifically. That's Every Student Succeeds Act, which is the follow-up to the No Child Left Behind Act. So with that, Amy, welcome. Thanks for making the trip over.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
No problem. Thank you so much for having me, and thank you for making time for Every Student Succeeds Act on your agenda. I really appreciate that. I'm not going to go into more detail than you probably want to know about the Every Student Succeeds Act, but I'm going to give you kind of an overview of the things that I think will be important to a district like Cedar Rapids. So here are the basics of what the Every Student Succeeds Act, which I'm going to call ESSA, does. First of all, it replaces No Child Left Behind, which most people weren't too depressed about. No Child Left Behind had become something of a burden on schools because we had gotten so many schools on what was known as the SINA or DINA list. So schools in need of improvement or assistance and districts in need of assistance. And there were so many on there that it was kind of hard to get assistance out to all of them, and there were sanctions associated with being on that list. I imagine that the board here had conversations about that. This law still maintains a focus on equity for all students, but really emphasizes the ability for states to determine what they want to do for their plan under ESSA. And so it's kind of a new step toward putting no federally prescribed targets, no federally prescribed sanctions, but sort of a power back in the hands of the states. This is a wonderful opportunity for Iowa, and so if there's literally one thing you remember from everything that I say tonight, it would be this is an opportunity for Iowa to capitalize on all of the hard work we've been doing in the last 5 years. We had started working on a new accountability system 4 years ago. We are currently in our 3rd year of full implementation of that accountability system. We call it differentiated accountability. And it's really a way to look at having great, rigorous targets for our students, capitalizing on using teacher leadership and compensation system that is working across the state, and giving schools what they need when they need it. So it's differentiated for schools. The way that this works is all schools in the state, and for that matter, all of our preschool programs and all of our area education agencies do an annual audit. And by audit, I mean it's a mini audit, it's a desk audit, so that we know that they're in compliance with state and federal law. We only ask the really important things, like are you meeting the requirements of giving the classes that are an opportunity for kids. So we offered these courses that are the very basics that kids need to graduate, and kids took them, right? So, and we ask, are your teachers licensed? We check those things, right? But we don't audit every little thing that we possibly could about a school every year. If we did that for every school every year, we'd miss the big picture, which is, are kids growing? Are they getting the resources that they need, right? So what we do then is we have what we call healthy indicators. And we measure where are students in need of additional supports. And by students, I really mean schools, because we at the Department of Education don't intervene with students, you do. And so what we do is go out and support schools. And when I talk about support for schools, what we have done is written all of this into our ESSA plan that we submitted to the federal government. So what we've been doing across the state of Iowa in cooperation with area education agencies for the last several years is really something that we wrote right into the ESSA plan. So what schools experience now as we implement ESSA is hopefully not different than what they've been experiencing for the last couple of years. So we're not going to have this big hiccup where everyone changes gears. It's going to be more of the same and just getting better and better. Here's a few things that we had to do as part of ESSA. So first of all, we had to set some goals. We're all accustomed to setting goals. Local boards set goals, the state sets goals, the State Board of Education sets goals. I'm not going to focus a lot on the goals right now because the goals had to be set based on the state assessment. Our state assessment is going to change, and it's going to change based on maybe the outcome of a hearing that is going on soon to determine whether we are awarding it to one vendor or another. It could change based on the outcome of legislation. We don't know what will happen this legislative session. So the goals are going to have to change. I am going to focus on public schools that are going to be identified as in need of some improvement. We're going to have to do that at least once every 3 years. And then we are going to have to identify 2 classes of them. So one will be the lowest 5% of public schools that are receiving Title I funding. And the other will be public schools receiving Title I funding that could be in the lowest 5%, but they are also having, they're struggling with student subgroups. So those student subgroups aren't growing. We call the first one comprehensive support, so bottom 5%, comprehensive support. We call the second one targeted support. Student subgroup struggling, targeted support. That's the part I'm going to focus on because I think those are the things that are going to really impact districts like Cedar Rapids when it comes to the changes for ESSA. Questions so far? All right. So how do we determine who's in the lowest 5% and who is in the targeted support because you're struggling with subgroup performance? ESSA gave us a list of things that we had to measure, and basically it comes down to creating an index of measurement here. They told us we had to include student participation on state assessments. So right now that's the Iowa assessment, so that's the one that's going to change. We had to include academic achievement. That's also on the Iowa assessments, and that's in reading and math. We had to include student growth. We had to include the graduation rate if we're talking about a high school. More on that in a moment. We had to include progress in achieving English language proficiency for English learners. And then we got to choose if we wanted to add other things, but we had to add at least one more thing. And whatever we added had to be something that was measurable statewide, was equally measurable for every student subgroup, so we had to be able to measure it by race, ethnicity, low socioeconomic status, and so forth. And our state chose to add 2 additional measures. One we call conditions for learning. This is a survey of students. There is a companion survey of staff and parents that goes with it in schools. It is a validated measure that we have used as part of a federal grant in the past. And what it does is ask students questions like, do you have an adult who cares about you at school? Do you feel safe at school? Have you been bullied or harassed in the past year? So it's really measuring, regardless of all of the achievement and things like that, is their learning environment a safe space for them? We measure the index off of the student responses, but any district can choose at any time to use the staff responses and the parent responses to triangulate that information as well. The other measure that we have chosen to add is the post-secondary readiness measure. This one's interesting because we don't have a measure yet. What we said we would do in the ESSA plan is we would create a measure that would be something like the conditions for learning in that it's an index made up of a lot of pieces. We threw several out there to stakeholders to kind of weigh in on during the process of writing the plan, and no one really liked any of them, to tell you the truth. We said we could use the ACT as a predictor of post-secondary success. We said we could use concurrent course enrollment, so enrolling in courses with a community college or something like that. The problem is that none of them really measure exactly what it means to be ready for post-secondary success. They measure a portion of it. And so we are going to convene a group of stakeholders to come up with a measure that people feel is a more well-rounded measure of post-secondary readiness. So the first year of ESSA implementation, we're not going to have this measure ready. But the way this will work is all of these will be placed on a scale, and it's an index of every school in the state, and it's a school index, not a district index. So Cedar Rapids won't be ranked, but every school building that receives Title I dollars will. These are the weightings for the first 3 years of implementation. So implementation begins, this chart is incorrect. So the first year of weighting begins in 18-19 rather than 17-18. But the first year, you see that for an elementary or middle school, conditions for learning is weighted at 5%, and it ramps up to 18%. We wanted it to be 18% from the beginning. The problem is right now, we don't have the measure validated for 3rd and 4th graders. We have it validated all the way down to 5th grade. But in order to use this with 3rd and 4th graders, we need to go through another validation study where we have some experts come in and actually work on this measure a little bit more. We've also never used it across the state before, and so we're going to be spending this next year working on getting people used to the data. So we're going to be ramping up the weighting of that one. But you can see the rest of the weighting, how that balances out. Growth is more important than any of the other indicators. So what will happen for elementary schools is they will be weighted this way, ranked from 1 to, it's 1,300 and something elementary schools. And the lowest 5% will be in need of comprehensive assistance. Now, I say that just for elementary schools, because I said I would come back to this. There are very few high schools that receive Title I funds. In the event that we have any, this is what their ranking will look like. So you see post-secondary readiness is 0 for the first year, and it ramps up to 8% by the 3rd year.
Just a second. What do you guys anticipate will be the intersection with the state report card? Because that thing's still sort of lingering around out there.
Yes, that's a great question. Is the board all familiar with the state report card?
It wouldn't hurt to review. I think we haven't thought about that for a while. I'll speak for me. I haven't thought about that
Okay.
for a while.
So there's a piece of Iowa code called Attendance Center Rankings that requires us as the Department of Education to rank all attendance centers, so school buildings, public school buildings in the entire state, on a number of indicators. Some of them coincide with these indicators, some of them do not. The measurement sometimes coincides and sometimes doesn't. We have noted this, pointed it out to the governor's office, and it is being taken under consideration. We anticipate that in future years, this may be something that can be amended so that there aren't multiple measures out there. We don't think it's going to be something that can be fixed for the upcoming year, 18-19, but that in future years, that could be something that can be adjusted. No one wants, including the governor's office, the legislature, no one wants multiple measures out there for districts. I think the flaw right now is that we don't see a way to fix it in time for the fall of 18-19 for a number of reasons. It would require a legislative fix.
Okay, so it'll take legislative action is what you're.
It will take legislative action. What we've tried to make very clear in this plan for ESSA is that we will not add any measures that do not have an evidence base behind them as having an effect on student learning.
That makes sense.
So we were hesitant to join the measures, so to just like put the Iowa legislation into this plan, because we didn't want all of those measures crowding in how you would determine how to assist a school, if that makes sense.
And then you mentioned that the state assessment could change by hearing or by law. Is somebody, are they in a process right now? Is that
Yes, so I apologize if the board's not up to date on that
I
yet.
just kinda
So
snipe
lots
away
of
at
times
it
I
here.
go places and everybody is pretty heated about the state assessment. So here's the update on that. The Department of Education awarded a bid proposal on the state assessment that would be a follow-up to using the Iowa assessments. The award of the bid was challenged by another vendor. That is going to a hearing in front of an administrative law judge.
Okay.
So, and the department's ability to pursue anything on the contract right now is under a stay.
Thank you. That's okay.
All right. So I think one of the most important questions that you all probably have is, are Cedar Rapids schools going to be in comprehensive or targeted assistance? And will we get any money for this? Or if I were you, those are the questions that I would want answered. And what's going to happen to us, right? And so I think this is all good news for schools in Iowa. And the reason I think this is we have had 3 years of great success helping schools with the differentiated accountability system. About 80% of the schools that we have visited with an intensive sort of on-site visit through the process we've worked up have seen growth now in their literacy scores. So that's good news. We're also getting great feedback from the regional sessions of training that we're offering. So we're training between 2,500 and 3,000 people per season. It's kind of a training season that we have in the fall now. So what happens is the first step is to find out if a school has a graduation rate of less than 66%. As I said, that's going to be very rare. If you're in the lowest 5%, though, that's going to be someone who receives comprehensive assistance, and you will get an on-site visit from a team of folks that are made up of Department of Education and AEA staff. The second step is to find out if you have underperforming subgroups. That's targeted assistance. Then that school will receive assistance through regional trainings where you can send teams of people. And that is also teams of people from the Department of Education and AEAs. There is money associated with both of these groups. Comprehensive will receive, divided among the comprehensive schools, $2 million in the first year, and about $4 million divided among them in the second year and the third year. This is 30 schools across the state. That's more money than we had to spread among them under NCLB. The AEAs will receive $2 million spread among the AEAs to help those schools. And then the targeted schools will receive a $2 million cut to plan for implementation for all 3 years of implementation combined. So it's a hefty bit of money compared to what we used to have under NCLB. I'm sure when you receive the money as a school, it'll feel like not enough. But we are doing our best to use the system we've set up over the past few years to capitalize on that to help schools. And this is just a little diagram of what it'll look like to a school in comprehensive support. First, they'll do a data review in an online module that's self-paced. Then they'll do, we call it the SAMI. I try not to use acronyms, but this it's a self-assessment of MTSS implementation. That's online and self-paced. Then they'll come to one of our regional sessions. We will have our cadre of people there to help them, where we will go through some of our facilitation guides, which I said we've used with success. And then they'll do an action plan. And there's an action plan under NCLB. This one's much shorter. And it will go into, again, an online module. This action plan, however, will be followed up on for 3 whole years with a consistent team of people. If it's a comprehensive school, we will come to them in addition to the regional sessions. So we'll do an on-site visit. So that's basically what it looks like. And nowhere in there do you see anything about sanctions, replacing the principals, firing half the staff. Those are all things that were turnaround models under NCLB. So here's where we are. We submitted our plan to the U.S. Department of Education. They have 120 days to review the plan. We are not really waiting for them to reply to us to get started on this. We have started our implementation meetings. We are starting to put together guidance on using funds for this year and in the future, and planning for next year's trainings. So that's kind of our summary of where we're at right now. Are there any questions that I can answer?
Any questions from the board?
I do have a question. And it's about for the measurement for growth,
Yes.
for that student growth. What tools are those going to be using?
That will be using the Iowa assessments, and it's actually a student growth percentile for the first year. So it's basically taking kids that are performing at about the same and determining if I have performed about as well as kids who performed similarly. And the reason is in the first year, we need a growth measure that will go from Iowa assessments to something else. we would like to reconvene our group to determine how to move from something other than a student growth percentile to a measure that everyone feels a little bit better about.
Thank you.
Other questions?
Yep, I have a quick question. So I understand what schools we're looking at, understand what percentages we're looking at, whether or not they would be comprehensive or targeted. So what would the makeup be of the participants? Would it be just teachers? Would it be paras? Would it be counselors? Would it be administrators? What would a makeup look like for this process?
That's a really good question. Here's what we've encouraged. And ultimately, I forgot they told me to point it this way. Ultimately, this is up to the district or school that's participating, but here's what we've encouraged. Anytime a school is participating in one of these blue blocks, they have the decision makers present for allocating resources. So that is to be the superintendent, the principal, whoever it is, curriculum director, right? That they have the people who are responsible for determining what instructional materials they're using. So teacher leaders, right? And so when we're talking about literacy, they have their literacy leaders there, and they have their classroom teachers there. And so for some schools, this means subs for an entire block of classes for 2 days. And they do it. And it takes a chunk of cash. But we're getting a lot of growth for it. So we are encouraging that much of a use of time and FTE.
Okay, thank you.
Gary, did you have a question?
Yeah, early on, when I was looking at the reauthorization, it seemed that an overriding theme was that there would be more control that would be at the local level, the local school board. I guess you just pointed out a little bit there, but what responsibilities do we have as a local board in this plan?
There's a couple of big ones. One is that action plan can't be written without appropriate stakeholder involvement, and you're a stakeholder in it. So assuming that Cedar Rapids would have schools in comprehensive and targeted, which is not a bad assumption. I think that any of the urban centers in Iowa can assume to be involved in this in some way. You would need board involvement in crafting those plans and ensuring that they are appropriate and they're written to meet the kids' needs. So those plans need to have stakeholder involvement. Another piece of this that isn't really the meat of ESSA is a separate section of ESSA that's not about the accountability system. It is, and it's a small pot of money. It's $2 million for the entire state, but it is the well-rounded education pot of money, and districts all get to apply for their share of those funds, and that can be used at the district's discretion with board input for things like supplementing talented and gifted programs, physical education programs, fine arts. And that can be a place where the board can have input on how that's integrated with things that you're already doing in your district.
Was that written into the plan by the Department of Ed?
Absolutely, it was. It is just not about the accountability system, which is what most people are talking about.
Is that $2 million, can that be adjusted? In other words, through legislative action, could there be more money in it? $2 million doesn't seem like going across the state for some pretty important, I believe, items.
Yeah, that is the federal allotment. And so if federally they change their minds and were to give that block grant more money, we would get more money coming into the state. You know, originally when they were talking about reauthorizing ESSA or ESEA and turning it into ESSA, we were told this was going to be a $50 million block grant. There was going to be so much money for all of these programs. It's turned into $2 million. And so you can imagine how disappointed we are as well in not having that source of funding.
That gives me the direction. Thank you.
Yep, there you go.
Any other questions? Dr. Buck?
No, that's great. Thanks, Amy.
Thank you
Appreciate it.
so
Thank
much.
you so much.
Yeah.
Next up is our 2017-18 Certified Enrollment. Karla?
Good evening. Let Justin get the PowerPoint up. So it's my pleasure to share information with you tonight regarding our 17-18 certified enrollment. And so a little bit about the certified enrollment process. It actually begins on October 1st. And that is the date that we count every student who attends Cedar Rapids School District. So we pull that data on October 1st. It goes through a verification process at the district level here, and we certify that with the state on October 15th. Once that certification occurs there, so every district across Iowa does that, and then the state verifies the data on their end and provides that final certified number to us somewhere around November 1st. So we have that number. Right, we got it on one. All right. So we're going to talk about certified enrollment in kind of two parts. The first part is going to be what I'm calling student enrollment. And that is the number of students who physically attend our buildings. So that number is made up of students who open enroll into the Cedar Rapids School District, who tuition into our district, and then who are resident students who attend school here. The other piece, and so we'll talk a little bit about that, and then the other piece when we talk about certified enrollment is our actual or our funded enrollment, and I know that part is on your minds as well. So that number is actually made up of, we receive funding for services we provide to students. So that includes our resident students, students who open enroll out and tuition out. So for example, if a student open enrolls out of the Cedar Rapids Community School District, we actually receive the funding for that student, and then we pay that funding to whatever school district they open enroll into. It also includes students who are homeschooled, and funding for homeschool students is done in partial bits. So for example, a student who is in homeschooled but participates in an extracurricular activity is funded at like a 0.1 of a full FTE of a full student. If they're enrolled in a homeschool assistance program, they're funded at a 0.3. And if they're enrolled in a homeschool assistance program and take classes within our schools, they are funded at a 0.4. We also receive funding for non-public students and homeschool students who take college-level coursework that we pay for. So we receive a little bit of funding for that as well. So we're going to start by talking about the student enrollment, or the students who actually physically attend our district, and dig into that number a little bit. This graph outlines some longitudinal data and represents the number of students who attend our buildings minus homeschool assistant students. So if a student is homeschooled, they're not reflected in this number. As you can see, we have a slight decline this year. The last 2 years, we've had a slight increase. The first year, from 14-15 to 15-16, we saw an increase of about 85 students. And then an increase of 52, and then this year a decline of 61. That number does mirror what RSP is predicting for enrollment across our district, and those numbers are not extreme. Feel free to ask questions if you have any along the way. So as we take that 15,960 students and we break that out a little bit, the first level that we're going to look at is by level. So the orange bar that you see are the number of students who are enrolled at our elementary level. Yellow is middle, and then the green is high. And so if you look at those enrollments for the past 6 years there, those numbers are typically pretty consistent across the district, ranging from about 72 to 7,300 at the elementary, around 3,500 at the middle school, and right around 5,000 or 5,100. So as we continue to dig into that, the next one that we're going to look at is of those 15,960 students that we serve, what percentage of them receive free or reduced lunches? It is broken out by level, and then the last bar there is the district aggregated together. So we have the highest percentage of students receiving free and reduced lunch at our elementary, and then lowest at the high school level. And across the district, about 48% of our students receive either free or reduced lunches.
Just a comment. I have heard in the past that our middle school and high school, the numbers may not truly reflect the economic level because they're self-reporting
Yes.
and they don't. So it isn't that there's an economic jump that happens in those middle and high school that
Parents need to fill out the appropriate paperwork for the student to receive either a free or reduced lunch rate, and that tends to happen more at the elementary level than it does as the student ages.
Do you want to, I don't know if it's you, Karla, or maybe Steve, talk a little bit with the
CPC, I think.
some of our schools that are 100%, and that may be impacting that 48%. It may not actually be that it's less, it may not actually be fewer.
It's a question in my mind as well, and I think
Yeah.
it's one that we want to take a look at because we have the CIP schools. Now
Okay.
we've gone from
Thank
4 to 10. And does the increase of CIP schools necessarily equate to a decline overall in free and reduced participation is the question.
So could you just give a little review of what CIP is and
Right.
what the difference is, and
CIP.
just it'd be helpful
Right.
for.
We
yeah.
have neighborhoods that are defined to be in zones where every child in that neighborhood eats free. There is, previously we would count, and every student would fill out the application for free or reduced lunches, and now we are able to take the entire block and put everybody on free and reduced. And the only applications that are completed by parents then are those who want to go beyond just simply the meal. They have discounted for other things like transportation assistance, etc. So because of the block that qualify, I don't know the answer. We need to look into the answer to see if there's any correlation between that creep down from 50 to 48 and the increase from 4 to 10 CIP schools this year.
Yeah, thank you both. Yep.
Thank you. The next slide that we are going to see here is, again, these are students who are attending our schools, students who are enrolled, and by ethnicity. The orange bar on the left represents Asian students, the yellow bar is African American students, the green bar is Hispanic, and then the kind of rust-colored bar there represents white students.
So Karla, we know that we have other ethnicities in our district. How are they?
So if you were to add those numbers up, Mary, you would get 99%. So we have, the other ethnicities are Hawaiian, Pacific Islander, Native American, multiracial. And so their numbers are so low that we don't publicly report. And so they would make up fractions of 1%, each of those. Other questions? Okay. This slide details our open enrollment trends in the district. And so if you look, and it also reflects actual bodies students. So for example, a homeschool student is reflected in this data as 1, even though their funded amount might be a 0.1 or a 0.3 or a 0.4. So they're not reflected, it's not their weighted funding here, it's actual numbers of kids. So if you look there, we have had open enrollment out has been on an increasing. We've had about 86 and 81 students between the 14-15 and 15-16 year. There was 86. 15-16 to 16-17 was an increase of 81. And then this year, we had an increase of 51. So it has declined, but it is still, we do still have more students leaving.
Do we know why students are open enrolling out of Cedar Rapids? Is there any?
We
data
have
on
done,
that?
yes, we have done a survey of several, actually. The last one that we did was last year during the 16-17 school year. We had about, I think it was 14.5% was our response rate. The reasons that they give are varied, from very specific, I want to homeschool my child, and they've selected a different homeschool assistance program, to, we moved into the Cedar Rapids School District. My student was already attending a school somewhere else. There's just a huge variety of reasons for the parents who responded.
Could we, I know we can't, we have a very low percentage of return surveys, and we cannot, there is an open enrollment form, but that is dictated by the state. We cannot
Correct.
add to that. That is required that they submit that, so. Could we have our new data analyst take a look at least, could we get a dot map of where these open enrollment students were going to school, or where they're living currently in Cedar Rapids?
Yeah, we can either have them take a swipe at that. I see Noreen writing that down. Thank you, Noreen. Or, and if they're not able to get at that data set, we could also ask RSP to help us with that data set too, because they know locations of kids by household. So we could take a look at that. Yep.
Yeah, just trying to look at, maybe it's another way of going at, trying to get some useful, some data that might be predictive of what's happening.
And one of the things I think I'm recalling from that survey is an interest in homeschool. So they like what is provided at Marion Homeschool and what Marion Homeschool looks like. So that's a significant number of those students. And another thing to keep in mind is a lot of those students have never attended Cedar Rapids Public. So
That
they
is
started, they started kindergarten at either College, Linn-Mar, or Marion Homeschool, and those are the three big ones. And so they've never actually even attended Cedar Rapids schools in many of those cases.
According to the survey that we got back, that was approximately, so of the people who responded, approximately 28% of them had never stepped foot in Cedar Rapids schools. All right, and the last slide I have talks about the funded enrollment, so maybe last but not least, right? So the positive news here is that, so when we weight all of these students, so a student, if they're homes, the 0.1 kids, the 0.3 kids, any student who is weighted, we end up with about 17,129 FTE, or funded amounts of kids. But that is made up of, again, it's our resident kids, students who open enroll out and tuition out, again, our homeschool students, and then the funding we receive for non-public and homeschool college-level courses that students take. So that is an actual increase there of about 37.75 funded equivalent. However, that is prior to the open enrollment coming out of that number. So once we factor in the weighted open enrollment out, which is about 46 kids, we are down approximately 8.25, approximately 8 students in terms of funding equivalents for the school year.
When a student open enrolls out, is that an annual procedure? Do we have to, they do it for, is it a one-time deal?
Yep, so once a student open enrolls out of the district, they are allowed to attend the district that they open enrolled into until they don't want to anymore, until they graduate or until they choose to leave that district or move. So yes, it's a one-time form.
Nancy, I have a question.
Oh, okay, Mary. I'm sorry.
Are Iowa Big students included in the aggregate?
Yes.
And I don't think I saw a breakout of them individually at that school. as far
No,
as-
you did, they,
Okay.
You did not.
Okay. Is
Yeah,
that something
they are
that we can see?
they are each assigned to a school. So when the data is pulled from Power School, so for example, my home school, so to speak, might be Washington, I would be reflected in Washington numbers.
So when we decided to allow Iowa Big to be created in our district, one of the criteria was the enrollment had to mirror the district demographic.
Yes.
And I just want to see if there's some data that indicates that we are not, or
The
what the reality
demographic
is.
data of the enrollment at Big.
Yeah.
Yeah, we can get that.
Okay.
That is not, excuse me, Mary, a piece of certified enrollment per
Right,
se. But
right.
yeah.
And
we
I
can get that.
understand the homeschool
Yeah.
portion, yep.
Any other questions?
So it may be worth noting what that funded actually means. So I don't know if Karla or Steve wants to do this.
Well, I will try,
Okay.
but
All
Steve
right,
may have
all
to
right.
come to my
So Steve's
rescue.
gonna vet it.
So,
Very good.
or maybe I should just let Steve do it. But so basically, what that means, assuming state supplemental aid of 1%, when so the new money that will come into the district, based on that, and then once open enrollment is paid out, so the new money is approximately around, I think. I have it written down, so forgive me for not having that in my, but, and Steve, don't. So new money would be about 1.3 million based on that number. Once we factor in open enrollment out, the new money would be about 950,000. Right, Steve?
One more dimension to that would be especially helpful, yep.
I think there's just a lot of numbers flying all over the place here. If we had a 1% growth in SSA next year, we have this little tiny growth rate of students on a resident pupil enrollment of 37, right? So 1% plus an enrollment growth is just a smidgen over 1. Let's just say 1.1%. It's even less than that, but let's just say 1.1%. Now, when we factor open enrollment in, we're losing students under open enrollment to this -9 that Karla referred to. So that 1.1% of growth now goes down to 0.9% growth. You see, open enrollment out has more than flipped this equation around from something a little over 1% to something a little bit less than 1%. So does that make sense to you now? Now, we use 1% because if the state of Iowa gave us zero, we are guaranteed 1% growth rate, you see, under the law. That's why we use the 1%. So that would be a worst-case scenario for us unless something surprises us in the interim. So.
Thank you.
Last year was a little bit different. Last year, we were on the other side of that because we had a little bit of an increase, so we got whatever we got last year, 1.25 or whatever. I don't know what last year was. It's so small, it's hard to keep track of, but yeah. So ours was up a little bit of that with enrollment. The reverse now will be true in this case. We'll actually get a little bit less than whatever's there, so.
Other questions?
Any other questions? Thank you, Karla. Board governance, it's an information item only. Dr. Bach and Laurel.
So tonight, the Policy Review Committee is bringing forward some policies and regulations for your review. The policies would be returning at the December 11th board meeting for final approval. Regulations do not require a second read. And if you have any questions, we're here to answer them for you.
Any questions from the board?
Could we just highlight a couple things? And I don't know if, Linda, if you want to highlight them or if you'd like me to, in terms of the inclusive nature of what happened with these policies.
I can try.
Okay.
I don't have my notes on these.
Okay.
I wasn't prepared.
Oh, sorry about that. I can do it, and then I can just stumble through it if it's wrong. That's what people assume. Oh. Right.
So, yes, as we looked at the voluntary retirement plan for this year, we started to go through that plan and recognized that in our intent to be all-inclusive with our employees, there are some of our groups that are not included in the voluntary retirement plan. So what you'll see in the updated documents is us including those individuals into the plan that closely relates to their type of classification. So I think there were a number of groups that we added this year.
Yeah, so There were groups that were, we believe, accidentally omitted because of the way the tables were defined in these policies. And so when we came to know of those groups, came to the board with a recommendation to make sure that those groups are now included going forward, and that's what's
Yeah.
observed here. So, because we think that was just oversight. There's one other group, CROTA, is not mentioned in these documents tonight, and that's because they were on a memorandum of understanding. They're included for 17-18, that was in the memorandum of understanding. It was not in the memorandum of understanding. We don't have one for 18-19, so that'll need to happen through the negotiations process. That's why they're not here tonight. So it's just a part of where things are.
That's it?
That's it? Okay, thank you. To remind everyone, you have your school board calendars. And to let you know, the meeting is adjourned. Thank you all for attending. Have a good evening.
Thanks, Director.